Okay, welcome everyone to today's Google Webmaster Central Office Hours Hangouts. My name is John Mueller. I'm a Webmaster Trends Analyst here at Google in Switzerland. And part of what I do is talk with webmasters, publishers, SEOs, like the people here in the Hangout and the people who submitted questions, and try to get your questions answered. A bunch of questions were submitted already with the Q&A feature. That's usually the best way to kind of get questions up here. If you can make it in here live, usually these slots go very quickly. So if you want to join one of the future ones, make sure you put your comment into the event page and make sure that you're available when I open it up a few minutes before we start. With that said, let's get to one of your questions. Do any of you have anything?
Last week I've been waiting patiently since Google News Hangout to ask you a question.
All right.
Okay, so better be a good one, right?
I guess.
So I wanted to know, do you guys give priority, like, do you give more priority to a responsive website, or is there a difference between, like, would you less kind of give authority to like an m.dot as opposed to a responsive website? In other words,
no.
No?
No. We essentially treat the three different ways of handling that equivalently. Mm-hmm. There's some, I guess, inherent advantages to using the same URL or to having a responsive website, which mean, for example, you don't have to worry about things like canonicalization. We crawl one URL and we get the full content. That makes it a little bit faster, but that's more of a technical issue than an actual ranking issue. So if you set your site up properly according to our guidelines, what we published, and you use one of those three methods, then that'll work. It's not that you have to use responsive or you have to go to an m.dot or something like that. Use whatever kind of makes sense, what works for your infrastructure.
And how about having like pages like terms of service and privacy policy? Does that make a difference as well? To have that, does bot look at that? You know.
I mean, we'll crawl and index those pages, but it's not that we have any kind of a special algorithm that seeks out terms of service pages and says, oh, this website has a terms of service, it must be a good one. Essentially, this is content that anyone can copy and paste from somewhere, so it's not necessarily a sign where I'd say, because you have a terms of service, this must be a higher quality website.
Yeah, because there's a lot of other SEOs out there that haven't told the business owners, hey, you need to see an IP lawyer to get these specific pages written. Unless you got AdWords, yeah, you have to have specifically like the terms of service privacy policy pages. But so it doesn't really matter, right? Like if a business doesn't have their privacy policy pages.
From our point of view, it doesn't really matter. For the users, I don't know. It might depending on the type of service that this website is offering. So if you're selling something and you don't have your address, you don't have your terms of service anywhere on a home page, then that's something where a user might kind of look at that and say, well, I don't know if this is really a legitimate business or if it's some fly-by-night spammer who's just trying to show up in search.
Right.
So, but that's something more on the user side. That's not something where we'd say Googlebot would be looking at the terms of service and kind of making sure that they're written correctly.
Okay. I just wanted to, because there was a big chatter around that somewhere. So, okay. Thank you so much.
Sure.
I have the perfect segue for that, John.
All right.
The perfect segue is this. So, I mean, that's a very excellent point. I mean, so today, would you say SEO, is it more about the technology of the site, or is SEO more about the psychology of the user? It seems to me we're moving into a state where SEOs are more marketers and we more have to make sure people are clicking where we want them to click, and what Miley Oye says a lot about task completion. What do you think SEO is more about the technology side of things or more the psychology side of things these days?
It depends on how you define SEO, I guess. I think there's a lot of technology behind making a website that works well. A website that's easily crawlable, a website where the content is directly visible. That's something where if you work on a bigger site, then you'll run into lots and lots of technical challenges. And these are things that are not trivial to kind of solve for an existing site. They're not always trivial to kind of set up properly for a new website. So there's definitely a lot of technical base knowledge that I think is necessary around SEO. And these are things that for people who've been in the industry for years now, they're like, well, this is all so obvious and common, you know. You have to be able to crawl a URL, and it has to have links to the other pages. It's something that you guys have gotten used to over the years, but new people who get involved here, people who kind of understand the technology of making really cool websites, they might not know all of this. And this is kind of like the technical side of SEO that I think is really, really important, because if you kind of mess up with the technical side of things and everything is on a single URL, but it uses this really cool technology, then these are things that essentially make it impossible for us to kind of crawl and index your content properly. So this is, I think the technical side of things is definitely shouldn't be underestimated. There's a lot of work involved there, and there's a lot of knowledge that you gain over the years that is really valuable when you go and talk to clients, when you go to look at new websites or look at existing websites to kind of help them improve things. The other aspect of user experience, I think that's something that kind of flows in with any kind of marketing. When you're kind of working on a website to make sure that it works well for the users, that's something that I wouldn't call inherently kind of SEO. That's something that you have to do with any kind of business if you're working with them. You have to make sure that it matches the client's needs, that it matches what they're trying to achieve, the task completion, those kind of things. So I wouldn't say that's something that belongs inside the technical SEO side of things, but it's definitely something that a lot of people forget when they work on websites, where we'll see them kind of work on their technology and they have this really cool, I don't know, Ajaxy website or Flash website that does really fancy things. But if you take a step back, you see, well, users are just trying to find our address or opening hours, and they can't get that. This is going to be a problem. And you can do all the technical SEO that you want to kind of improve this website, but if users can't use that website, then all of that work that you're doing to drive traffic to the website through search is going to be lost. It's not something that'll be interesting.
So you would say the psychology is not trivial?
Well, psychology is never trivial, but these are things where if you have experience on the web, you kind of notice these a lot faster. Just like when you look at a lot of websites, you'll see, well, this is a spammy website, this is a really reasonable website, and you'll be able to kind of spot that within a couple of seconds when you look at these websites, because you kind of have trained your eye over the years. And these are things that kind of overlap more and more with just generally things that normal webmasters get wrong, that essentially are things that could be fixed and improved.
Fantastic. Thanks, John.
John, I just wanted to add to that conversation as well that, I mean, I've been online since 1993. You know, 97 we saw Google. I'm still seeing, I sent you an email last night, I don't know if you received it yet, but, you know, we're still seeing incredibly poor stuff going on. I'm told to do all the right things. Everybody that's ever watched these Hangouts has seen me here for X amount of years now. We're playing by the rules, doing all the right things. We just keep getting lower in the rankings. Our site looks great. We've done user testing. We've done all the things that everybody's saying we should do, and we're seeing negative things. But on a positive side, we're seeing more user engagement, lower bounce rates. We're seeing all the things from our users to say everything's good. It's just Google that hates us. And so we don't know what's going on, but yet we see sites and businesses that consistently break the rules. The main culprit is #1 for our major key terms in the whole industry. They've been around a while, but their site got banned. They've now got a new site that redirects. They use hidden links, which I haven't seen since 1999. I mean, it's just unreal. And you can consistently see through blog posts that they're still doing this in November and December of just gone, and there's even more I found recently. So, you know, it's such a double standard. There's so many people. I'm not the only one that notices this. There's thousands of people. It just happens to be that I can get on this Hangout and have a voice with you about it. But, you know, what's the point? And, you know, we're spending thousands in AdWords. We're doing our part. We're contributing to Google. This is what you want us to do. You know, it's just not. It's not right. It goes against everything you guys say. And anytime I bring this up in webmaster forums, I'm told, concentrate on your own business and forget what other people are doing. Well, you know, it's just wrong.
I passed your note on, by the way, but I totally appreciate that feedback, and I can understand that this is frustrating, especially when you kind of work to improve your site and you don't see those positive changes kind of reflected in that. And I know that's not easy to kind of keep working on that. But I think you're headed in the right direction, and I think let's see, how can I phrase this? You have your heart in the right place, you're doing the right things, and I think in the long run that's something that will be reflected. But I totally understand that this is something you've been working on for years now, and that it's hard to kind of wait or continue working in this direction so long and not see significant changes.
Yeah, I mean, you're suggesting to me and other webmasters that we should create another site and use these cheap, crappy tactics to do what we do, because 4 years of what we've been doing hasn't paid off. 4 years. I mean, no other business, apart from a strong business like ours, would survive essentially without Google, which is what we've done for the best part of 4 years. You know, it's those companies crash and burn. So, you know, you're telling us and everybody else, copy those tactics. They work. And you look at our major key terms in Google in the US, and the results in Google are appalling. I mean, there's no way any engineer could stand by the results that show up there. It's just incredibly apparent. They're not even related businesses in some of those search results, and you know, something's horribly wrong. But we can't sit by any longer doing what we're doing. I mean, we can keep sitting there and waiting for what? We're watching everybody else pour in the cash, and they're not even good businesses. We're winning awards. We've done all kinds of things, and we're now the third largest virtual office supplier in the world, and we're not getting any recognition. So yeah, I know. Look, we'd have this. You told me this last time a year ago. You're doing the right thing. You're on the right track. It's just not the case. It's, you know, even if we did all the right things, the businesses were still ranking at the top in first, second, and third. Even if we were number one, we'd still push them down to second or third. They'd still be ranking. They're still there. The algorithm isn't working, and everybody's seeing this. On all the forums, people are talking about this. And you know, we want to work on our sites, but Google's the problem.
Yeah, I appreciate that feedback. I definitely pass that on. All right.
Thanks, John. Well, I'm going to get off this Hangout so I can give other people some space to get on. And I advise everybody else to ask their questions and then leave and allow other people to try and get on the Hangout. Thanks, John. Have a great time. Have a great week.
Thanks, Gary.
Bye-bye.
All right. At the moment, we use dynamic serving for mobile and desktop, but our site will become responsive. I understand that Google is recommending responsiveness, but is the loss of speed we're facing because of heavier source code a bigger problem for Google News? I can't speak for Google News directly. That would have to be someone from Google News to look at that. But with regards to web search, generally speaking, the change of speed on that order of magnitude isn't something where you'd see any significant changes in how we kind of crawl and index your website or how we show it in search. So in general, when we look at the speed that it takes for a site to render, for example, we try to differentiate between sites that are really, really slow and sites that are kind of reasonably fast. So if your site is kind of reasonably fast and you're just seeing like changes in the millisecond area, then that's not something where we kind of take that into account for Google's ranking. So we wouldn't say, well, this is, I don't know, 110 milliseconds instead of 120 milliseconds, therefore it'll be a slot higher. That's not the level of detail that we're looking at there. We're really looking at the overall rough picture to see, is this site reasonably fast? Is this something where if a user clicks on it, they'll be satisfied in a reasonable time? Then that's essentially okay. Also, there are ways to make even a responsive website fairly fast and snappy. So just because you're using a responsive design doesn't necessarily mean that things will be slower or more bloated. Is it a good idea to have a rel canonical link to the home page from 404 pages? The problem we have is that people link to our GA experiment pages, but when the experiment ends, there's a 404 we can't redirect due to parameters in the URL. This is something where I try to do what you can't do, namely set up a redirect and make sure that since those old pages were equivalent to your new pages and just on slightly different URLs, then I'd set up a redirect there. I think that would be fine. In the worst case, if you can't do a server-side redirect, then doing a JavaScript redirect would be a little bit better to at least make sure that users are actually reaching the right page after they kind of follow a link to the wrong URL. With regards to the rel canonical, if this is a 404 page and it's returning a 404, then we're not going to process any of the content on there, including any rel canonical. So if you have a rel canonical on a 404 page, that's something we're going to skip. So again, in a case like this, I'd really recommend to try to set up a redirect from the old URLs, the experimental URLs, to the current one. What can be done about individuals that build spam links to your website and then ask for payment to remove them? This is basically an extortion scheme that's affecting the rankings of these websites. They build hundreds of links with the same link text. This is something, on the one hand, our algorithms pick up on these things and essentially handle them fairly well. So in general, that's not something you really need to worry about. If you do notice that something like this is happening, then by all means use the Disavow tool and let us know about that so that we can kind of take those links out of the link equation. There's definitely no need to pay anything for these websites to kind of have them remove it. If you use the Disavow tool for something like this, then that's essentially equivalent. How much collaboration goes on between traditional search folks at Google and local or Google My Business folks? Seems like there's a bit of disconnect between the teams. Is this an accurate perception? It's hard to say because we're in different locations. So at least there's a disconnect in that regard. The other thing to, I guess, keep in mind is that the Google My Business is essentially focused on the map side of things and not directly on the search side. So there's always this kind of traditional separation within Google where we say the organic search side should be as neutral as possible and shouldn't be kind of like influencing people on the ad side, shouldn't be influencing people on the map side. That should essentially be separate. So what we try to do in many of these cases is really make sure that we keep the separation as strict as possible. That means when we make changes in web search, then they'll find out about it the same time that any of you find out about it, the same time that any of other external companies might find out about it. So in that regard, that's possible that they might not know everything that we're doing because we try to keep them separate as much as possible. On the other hand, we also try to understand that a lot of small local businesses, they essentially go to maybe Google My Business team or to Google Local or somewhere like that, and they want to get the same kind of information as well. So every now and then we will do something together where we'll say, well, these are the basics, the information that we've been giving out to webmasters in general. Maybe you guys would want to do something similar with that kind of information as well. And then every now and then we'll do some kind of a collaboration on that level.
So they have their own data, like Google My Business has their own data. I mean, now you guys left this other company that you were depending on for data. Now Google My Business is well, yeah, because I just saw Jade Wong. I saw her like 2 weeks ago at the local U, and so I talked to her. And so she was just mentioning that. So basically, so you guys don't use that data though at all, like because you have your internal data now.
I'm not sure which data you mean, but
You're gathering like the local directories. You're gathering info from GPS.
I think that might be something the Google My Business people do, or the Google Local, the Google Maps folks do. I don't know how they handle that. No idea. Sorry.
John, I have to ask. I got into the search impact alpha testing, and for example, I'm checking the dates. We have more than 6,000 keywords to our website from the long tail, and for Europe, its average position about 8, and for US is 30 to 60 such positions. So it seems that for US it gives completely out of third, fourth, fifth page only.
That's possible. I don't know about your website. So in theory, that's very possible that you might have very focused content where people in one country see it very highly in the search results and other people in other countries don't see it that visibly. So that's theoretically possible. I think the other thing to keep in mind with the search impact feature is that, especially when you're looking at impressions, we kind of count that a little bit differently, in the sense that with the old system, we would count every individual URL that's shown in the search results. So if for one query we show 2 or 3 kind of results from your site in the search results, then we'll count that as 2 or 3 impressions with the old system. And with the new system, we'll say, well, this is all the same site. It's 1 impression for the site. So you'll see kind of this, I guess, difference in the numbers, especially when you're looking at impressions. And I think the new system kind of makes sense in the sense that this is actually your site. It's the number of times people see your site. You don't really care like how many search results within these individual queries were actually shown. But maybe when we have a bit of time, we can do a separate hangout about the search impact feature to kind of get some broader feedback as well. I know some of you submitted the form and didn't get invited. We hope to kind of do another run fairly soon, so maybe we can get the rest of you all in that run. Yeah. And then we can do something broader.
It gives good insight. You basically see everything, what's going on from the queries, clicks, impressions, countries. It works great.
Great. Are places or My Business listings listed in Webmaster Tools? No. That's essentially separate. What do you think about disavowing a specific link structure? For example, www.example.com/index, !sref equals something. I'm not really sure what you're trying to do there. In general, if this is within your website, then that's not something I'd use a disavow tool for, because that's not really what it was meant to do. It wasn't really meant to kind of remove links within your own website, but rather remove links from external sites pointing at your website. With that in mind, if there's something on external websites that you kind of want to have removed from the link graph, then as much as possible we recommend using the domain directive in the disavow file so that you kind of have all variations of these URLs covered. So don't just try to find that one individual URL with maybe a very specific parameter in it and just disavow just that, but rather, if at all possible, disavow the whole domain so that all variations of that URL and the variations that are kind of indexed with the same content, that they're taken out as well. What's the best process for removing a manual penalty from a domain when the website will be dismantled? Will directing to a splash page that says this site has been deleted help us remove the penalty through reconsideration so that we can 301 elsewhere? I think there are 2 aspects here. On the one hand, you want to get rid of this penalty, which which I think is fine to kind of get rid of. If there's something old and problematic that you had on your website, on the other hand, you're redirecting to a different website. With regards to reconsiderations, the web spam team generally likes to see that there's really content on this website where it makes sense to actually kind of remove a penalty or manual action. So, for example, if a site is removed from search because of spammy content, and the web spam team looks at it during the reconsideration and just sees a 404 page, then they're not really going to have much to go by and say, well, this is good content, now we should index it. But actually, since it's a 404 page, we wouldn't index it anyway. So it's almost like you're trying to get something reconsidered, but there's actually nothing there to actually be reconsidered. So as much as possible, if you're doing a reconsideration, especially when it comes to content issues, make sure that this content is actually visible. So make sure that there's actually something high quality that the web spam team can say, well, this makes sense to index normally, therefore we should remove any manual actions. So if you're like moving from one domain and you're moving to a completely different domain, you have really high quality content on the new domain, then I just set up the redirect, do the reconsideration request, and say, hey, we have a completely different site now. All of the old site is essentially gone. And then the web spam team will be able to take a look at that and say, well, sure, all of this hidden text or all of this keyword stuffing or low quality content or whatever it was is gone, cleaned up, and we can focus on your new site. Will Matt Cutts be coming back to Google?
That's a great question.
I don't know. You'd have to ask him directly, I guess. He's not completely gone, so I won't say too much. But I think this is something I can't really answer. It's essentially a personal question for Matt. So feel free to ask him directly if you want in Twitter. Maybe he can tell you something. Maybe he doesn't want to. It's up to him.
Hi, John.
Hi.
Hello. I have a question about design and how it could improve or make things worse with Google. I'm sure you're familiarized with the websites like very trendy to put videos in the header in order to make more experience, bring more experience to the website design. So I was wondering if it could hurt the loading times, if it could affect to the rankings.
To put videos in the headings?
Yeah. They are big in the heading. They are played automatically when you get in.
I don't know how that would affect like Google search directly. So I think that's something. What might happen is we pick that up and say, well, these are video play pages, and we show like the video thumbnail next to the search results, which I don't know. Sometimes might be useful, sometimes might not be useful. But otherwise, that shouldn't affect search directly. I imagine some users might get upset if like you have auto-playing videos when you go to a page, but that's essentially between you and your users, not something that we kind of get involved in.
Okay, thank you very much.
John, I have a quick question.
Sure.
In Canada, we have different regions, provinces, and we have Quebec that primarily is French. And if I were to want to target content or a web specifically for Quebec, is there a way of doing that? Because from what I can gather in Webmaster Tools and everything, it's basically country-based. I can't break it down by a region or anything of that sort. Is there any suggestions or anything in the works to be able to do that, like besides creating a site and using the CMS to target IPs or anything like that? Like, I know you can, and that gets really nasty, and I don't want to get into that, but there are reasons either for legal compliancy or just to accommodate a difference between types of language, between, let's say, this type of French and that type of French.
No.
Just ideas. Nothing's in the works, but are just trying to come up with some plans for future.
Yeah, I mean, if it's essentially just French Canadian and French French, for example, then that's something you could do. You could like set up a site. Yeah, I mean, you could set up a website and say this is targeted for Canada, geotargeting with either CCTLD or with Webmaster Tools, and then you have your content in French, and essentially that kind of targets that automatically. So that would be essentially a really direct way to do that. You could also, if you have different variations of your content, like English content for Canada, or French content for Canada, or maybe French content for Canada and French content for France, then that's something where you could use something like the hreflang markup between those pages and say, this is the French-Canadian version, and this is the French-French version, and these are essentially the links between these pages. This is equivalent content that I have in various variations, and Google will then try to kind of swap that out with the hreflang.
Then if I wanted to build a site that was specifically for the US, and I don't want the Canadian market to come across it for any reason, or vice versa, what is possible to do?
Oh man, you don't like the Canadians, huh?
No, not.
Poor guys.
No, hello.
There are a couple in here in the hangout. They'll
Watch it, guys. Watch it.
Watch it, Sim.
Hey! I'm Canadian. Easy.
I'm going to turn my flag.
We can tell you're Canadian.
Oh, settle down, guys. Fight outside, okay?
Yeah, the flag didn't give it away behind you.
Oh, that's right. Thanks.
So, I mean, the main thing you can do is set up geotargeting. You can't guarantee through search that people from Canada will never see your content. So when it comes to search, it's always possible that someone in Canada searches on Google.com and they'll end up on your site because it's kind of showing up more visibly on Google.com. So that's not something you can really guarantee. What you can do if you wanted to be, or if you needed to be really direct and say, well, this really needs to be limited to the US and users in Canada can't see it at all for maybe legal reasons, for example, then you can block users outside of whatever region you're targeting by IP address or whatever, and say these users don't see the content, you're blocking them on your server through your htaccess file or whatever you have there, and presenting some kind of an error page to them. So for us, what's important is that when Googlebot crawls, it sees the same content as a user from the same region would see. And we generally crawl from the US, so in that case, you'd be kind of lucky because you'd be serving Googlebot the normal content, you'd be serving US users the normal content, and we're kind of happy with that. That's fine with us, that's not cloaking. It would be more problematic if it were the other way around, where you'd say users in the US aren't allowed to see the content, but users in Canada are allowed. Because in that case, we crawl from the US, we would also see this error page and say, hey, you can't look at this content. And then we'd say, well, we have nothing to index here. We can't show this site at all in our index because we're not allowed to crawl it. So in a case like that, that would be more problematic. That'd be something where you'd kind of, if you wanted your content found in search, you'd almost have to kind of come up with some kind of a backdoor there and say, this is a generic page about our content that legally we can show to users in the US, and we can have this page indexed. So the actual content itself won't be indexed, but kind of like this pointer to the content can be found.
Okay, that's really good. One last question. I'm not sure if I asked it last week. Site links, based off of the difference between, obviously, you can't do much about influencing those. Those are, you come up with those yourself. I've noticed, based off of region, to say someone doing the same search for our company in, say, Vancouver versus Halifax will get different options for site links. Is that possible? And again, also different experience when doing mobile. Are you that dynamic at this point?
Theoretically, it's possible. I mean, we do a lot of geotargeting where we try to figure out what's relevant for users in different locations, especially if we can recognize that they're trying to find something local. Then that's something where a user in one part of the country might see slightly different content than in other parts of the country. I imagine that's something you'll also see in the site link. So it's not just the normal search results, but also in the site links, you'll see that reflected. It really, I guess, kind of depends on the type of site that you have and what you're targeting. But if you have something, then that's something, sure, that's essentially possible.
All right. Thanks.
I think there was a question from Tien. Let me see. I have a question. When I search Backlinks, Google allows running of Google Ads, which Google won't allow. The question is, does Google have allowed the purchase of links in the algorithm? So I think at some point we stopped showing Google Ads for some of these queries if they're promoting something that kind of breaks Google's terms of service, those kind of things. I don't know if that applies to the queries that you're looking at there.
Thanks again.
Sure. All right. Why are EMDs still ranking so well in search when I can clearly recall multiple statements from Google saying that they would be devalued? In Italian, Google's situation is ridiculous in many search results. I think there are two things to kind of keep in mind with exact match domains. So these are the EMDs that are being talked about. Exact match domains are essentially when the keywords for a query match what the domain name says. So if you're looking for, I don't know, cheap red cars, then you would have cheapredcars.com as an exact match domain, kind of. And from our point of view, what we look at primarily is whether or not these provide a bad search experience, not whether or not they're like an exact match domain. So if we run across sites that are using exact match domains that are really low quality, then that's something we try to take action on, where we try to demote those either algorithmically or manually from the web spam team. On the other hand, there are lots of sites that have essentially exact match domains for the queries that they're targeting, but they're high-quality sites. They're normal websites, normal sites that we show in search. So just because it's using a domain name that matches the keywords of the content that they're targeting doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad site, one that we shouldn't show in search.
But with Batua, we'll be able to distinguish, like, for instance, if I have tennisballs.com, and so, like, Googlebot would know, hey, this is a brand, and so on, right? Like, I mean, there's so many signals he would be able to understand, right, later on? Or Hummingbird, that is, as well?
I didn't understand your example that well, sorry.
For instance, like, let's say I own tennisballs.com, and my brand is tennisballs.com. You, like, Googlebot will understand, right, that it's a brand. But well, if it was just a spammy website, you would know that as well.
I mean, it's not so much that we look at the brand and say, well, this is a known brand, we should treat it differently. It's more that when we look at the website, we see that this is something legitimate, something useful for users. So that's something we should show. I mean, if you look at a big website, I don't know, like Google.com or Amazon or Facebook, people are searching for that keyword, Facebook or Amazon, and they want to see that website. So you could argue that they're kind of an exact match domain for their brand name, but essentially this is what the website is called. They do a great job, so we should show them in search for those kind of queries. So that from that point of view, it's not so much that it's an exact match domain, but rather that this is something that a lot of people have abused in the past, where they'll take, I don't know, hundreds of domains that match the keywords that they're trying to target and just put low-quality junk on those pages. And in the past, maybe they get through and they get those into search and they get those ranking as well. I'm sure there are situations where we get that wrong now as well, and this kind of feedback is really useful. Also, with regards to saying that in Italian it's worse, that's useful a little bit, but even more information would be even more useful. So if you can send me a bunch of queries where you're seeing really low-quality content bubbling up in search for fairly generic queries, then that's really useful information for the engineers to kind of work on. I can't promise that they'll be like snap and rewrite their algorithms to handle that, but that's definitely something they take seriously, something we try to figure out what went wrong here and where we need to tweak a little bit more, where we maybe went too far, maybe we have to dial back things a little bit. So
John,
if you want to send me specific examples, that's always really welcome.
sorry, John. Would you say that EMDs might have a benefit in one way, in the sense that Baruch raised, that if you're selling red apples, for example, a fictitious red apples product, and people want to buy red apples, and you have buyredapples.com, and that's what they want to do, and you let them do that. I mean, it seems to me that at the very least, the EMD would have a slight leg up in that regard.
I think that's mostly a marketing advantage. So I wouldn't say that there is an inherent search advantage for that, but there's almost, I mean, I don't know. I haven't done any marketing research on that, but I would imagine there is at least a marketing advantage in that when people go there and say, whoa, well, this business is called Buy Red Apples. This is exactly what I was looking for. I'll go there. I'll buy something from them. They seem to know what they're talking about. So it's not so much that there's an inherent advantage in search. It's more that maybe there's something indirect or maybe psychological almost that takes place with the visitors where it does make sense to kind of look at that. I think from a business point of view, if you're using an exact match domain, you're kind of putting yourself in a very small corner. So that's something I'd be kind of cautious about. If you're starting a new business and you're selling red apples and you have buyredapples.com, that's fantastic. But if you want to kind of expand to bananas or oranges or, I don't know, different kinds of apples, then you're kind of tied in that corner. And you're like, well, buy your oranges at buyredapples.com, and you're kind of stuck in that situation. But that's not so much a search problem. That's more, I guess, a marketing, a branding problem. The other thing that we often see is that people will buy or set up a kind of exact match domain and say, well, I have buyredapples.com, and this is my brand, and people are searching for my brand but not finding my website. And from our point of view, when people are searching for Buy Red Apples, they're probably not searching for this obscure buyredapples.com brand. They're looking for this kind of general information. So it wouldn't be the case that we'd automatically show that site #1 in the search results there unless we really have a confirmation that actually this website is exactly the brand that they're looking for, exactly the kind of business they're looking for. But just because you have kind of matching those keywords doesn't mean we'll show it in search. And we'll see that sometimes in the forums where people will say, well, I branded my business buyredapples.com, and this is the brand that I want to kind of present to people. Therefore, Google should recognize that as a brand and show that in search. And that's essentially not the way it works. We kind of look at it from the other way around, where we see, well, people are accepting that this is the website and this is its name. Therefore, we should show it in search.
And as soon as you get it, you also said that you're giving you give it a boost as well, right? Like maybe a month or two boost, and then it goes back to its original place, like page 3 or 4. You kind of try it out sometimes, right? You try it out.
I think that's kind of separate from the general situation around like exact match domains. But essentially, if something is a really, really new website, then it's really hard for us to figure out how we should be ranking this because we don't have a lot of signals. Right. And that's something you might be seeing there. It might also be that depending on what you're kind of targeting, what you're looking at, is actually a really tough market where a lot of people are already very busy, where it doesn't make sense for us to say, well, we'll give this site the benefit of a doubt and we'll let it rank #1 for Amazon queries, because this is something we already know people are actually looking for this. So just because you're a new website, we won't automatically show you higher in search, but it is a lot harder for our algorithms to figure out what are the right signals that we should be looking at here, and how can we kind of collect more information about this website over time to figure out where would be appropriate to show in search.
Right.
All right, let me run through a bunch of these questions that were submitted, and then we'll try to get to some more Q&A. How does a short downtime affect rankings? I noticed my server froze up and I wasn't able to get it back up for a day and a half. My rankings dropped noticeably from the week prior to the week after. In general, in these kind of situations, we recommend making sure your server returns something like a 503 so that we understand that this is a temporary issue and that we kind of don't take that content into account for indexing, that we don't drop the URLs automatically, that we kind of give it a little bit more time to catch up. We'll try to recrawl those URLs before we actually do anything big in search. But temporary is always kind of a question of time. So a day and a half, I think, is something that we'd definitely be able to kind of tide you over with a 503. But if your website is down for over a month and you're serving a 503, then I wouldn't assume that Google will kind of keep everything frozen in the previous state and show that again. So like a day or so, I think, is something that we generally be able to handle really quickly. The difficulty here is if you don't have any control over what your server is showing during that downtime and it's serving a 404 page, for example, then that's something where we'll crawl your existing pages, we'll see the 404, and we'll say, well, oh, wow, this page disappeared. Maybe we should remove it from the index as well. So that's something where you might see a general drop in traffic to your website because of that. But as soon as we can recrawl those old pages and see that actually the content is back, then we'll kind of bubble that back up in search again. So these things can, if they're set up incorrectly, have a negative effect for temporary time, but it'll kind of bubble back up to the previous state usually fairly quickly. So if you had like a day downtime, then I imagine maybe a couple of days for things to settle back down with crawling and indexing again, and things will be pretty much this previous state again. Lost ownership after URL change. For internal reasons, we recently changed our URL structure, and 301 the old to the new. However, where some of our old copy has been content has been copied, the copier's page now ranks instead of ours. What can I do? So I don't really understand the question. It sounds like you moved from one website to another, and some of the content is still on the old site. I guess in a case like that, whenever possible, if you're moving from one URL to other, really make sure that you have clear URL redirect set up so that we can kind of follow those redirects. And then that's something that shouldn't really have a negative effect there. I'm not really sure how you mean the copiers here. So one thing I might do here is post in one of the help forums or post in the Google Plus communities and kind of talk to other webmasters about this. Maybe there's something technical that was set up incorrectly with the redirects there.
John, also, so when, as soon as that guy made that move, fetching and rendering would also help, no?
With a 301 redirect, you don't really need to resubmit that to Google with fetch and render function, because in the worst case, if we send people to your old URL, then they'll still get redirected to the new one. So it's not something that you kind of have to force that move manually in any way.
How long would it take for the old one to disappear from the results? So only when you make an update, right? Sometimes
depends. So if you're moving a whole site, then you'll probably see the primary content get moved fairly quickly within a couple of days, and the rest is going to take weeks to months, where maybe even after a year you'll still see some of that content indexed under the old URLs. And if you explicitly search for the old URLs, then we'll say, well, we know this content was also on these old URLs, so we'll show it to you because you're explicitly asking for it. So that's something where if you're explicitly looking for the old content, we'll show it to you because we think it's a good service for you, which might not be what you're looking for as a webmaster.
John, I have a question when you get done answering the other one.
Sure, go for it.
Oh, okay. This is an e-commerce site situation I wanted to ask you about. We have a site that has multiple products, or same product in multiple categories. Is that a negative effect? Having the same, basically same content, but in different categories?
Not primarily. So in most cases, we would figure that out, and we try to index the different URLs for the same content, the different category pages, essentially. And if someone is searching for something general, we'll pick one of those URLs and show it in search.
Would it be sorry, go ahead.
What you could do if you wanted to kind of force us to pick your preferred URL is just set up a canonical. Yeah.
That's what I thought. Okay.
All right. Ooh, just lots of questions left. Is it possible to recover from Panda without a new Panda update or Panda refresh? So Panda is our high-quality sites algorithm where we look at high-quality websites and try to show those a little bit higher in search. And if you've significantly cleaned up your content and you're kind of affected by this Panda algorithm, then that's something where you'll probably see changes unrelated to Panda positively affecting your website over time, but you'll probably see a bigger jump when the algorithm is actually updated. And this is something that's not either on or off. It really has a lot of shades in between. So it might be that we see that your website is generally a little bit better, and we'll reflect that in search as we kind of rerun those algorithms. There's a payday loan company that has the same name as our client mortgage company. Could this negatively affect rankings for the mortgage company? No, they would essentially be separate. So just because it has the same or similar name doesn't mean that we'll take that into account. Does Google Fetch ignore some characters in URLs? It looks to error out on plus signs, for example. Some plus within the path. It says redirect to with a space in the path. That sounds more like a bug than any kind of actual feature. So I'll definitely pass that on to the Webmaster Tools team to kind of take a quick look at what might be happening there. I sell well-known sites using. I see well-known sites using widgets to generate keyword-rich backlinks via publishers. The guidelines are 100% clear on providing widgets with default backlinks. What's Google's official stance on widgets with embedded keywords on follow links? This is something I try to avoid. I think we have cleaned up the guidelines a little bit, or we might be publishing something fairly soon to kind of make this a little bit clearer on what we kind of expect there. Let me see. Tian has a question. I'm having problems changing from a member in the forum. I managed to do that. If the opponent to use external software website for firing him millions of backlinks per day, which increased his numbers nonstop. So what should he do? So I think you're asking if a competitor is using scripts to create low quality or unnatural backlinks to your website. This is something where I just use a Disavow tool and submit those domains with the Disavow tool so that we can take those out of our equations, essentially. For the most part, we'll probably just ignore those links anyway, so it's not something where I'd say you need to kind of look at your links every day to do that. But if you're aware of this problem and you see these links in Webmaster Tools or elsewhere with other tools, then I just pull out the domain names and put them in a Disavow file and essentially leave it like that.
No need to write comments underneath the Disavow file, right? Just go ahead, domain operator straight, and then just pull this. No need to write this website is blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, we don't read the Disavow file. It gets processed automatically by our scripts. So unless you have something flattering to say to Googlebot, no need to add it. I mean, it's useful sometimes for you as a webmaster if you're maintaining this file so that you know what's kind of happening there, but you definitely need to put anything in there for us. All right, Mihai, I think, has a question.
Okay, thanks, John. I have an e-commerce client that has is using categories, and for categories that have multiple products that are featured on several pages, like page 1, 2, 3 of the category, they have a canonical to a view all page. So one question would be if that page takes a while to load because of the number of products, is that a problem? And the second one is, I'll send you the URL on. Now, the pages are actually, the products are actually generated on the page using Ajax. So the moment you enter, you might not see the products. So Googlebot, when he sees the page, might not see the products instantly. The page might now be cached, so I don't know what's the situation exactly. Would that be a problem indexing or crawling the products, or does the Googlebot wait a bit, see what's going on, or how does it actually work?
I think with the view all page, you just have to kind of make sure that you're not overdoing it, so that you don't have, like, I don't know, 5,000 products on the view all page, and it's like a 100 megabyte HTML page to kind of load. But if it's a reasonable page, I wouldn't worry about kind of the time it takes to load the full page. With regards to Ajax, I would use the fetch and render tool to make sure that we can actually see all of the content.
There's no products being displayed in the snippet, in the thumbnail screenshot.
Okay, then probably what's happening is if you look on the bottom of that fetch and render page, it mentions which URLs are blocked by robots text or which ones can't be fetched. And maybe there's like an Ajax URL or a JSON URL that's trying to be fetched that's blocked by robots text, and that's the reason we wouldn't be able to pull up the content. So if you can set it up so that we can actually fetch and render it, then that's something we'll try to take into account in search.
Okay, so it wouldn't be any problem if it uses Ajax, just as long as it's not blocked by robots text.
Yeah.
And one last thing, I did a site query, and it seemed that the canonical, so it's not the view all page that's showing up in the queries, it's only the first page of the category. The rest of the pages or the view all page don't really appear in the search results. Is that a signal that Googlebot might be ignoring the canonical to the view all page?
It's hard to say. I'd have to take a look at the specific example and look at that with the team. With the rel canonical, it's important to keep in mind we have to first index the page that's not canonical in order to see the rel canonical, and then we'll keep that page indexed as well. So if you do a site query specifically for that, you'll still find it, even if it has a rel canonical pointing somewhere else. So that's something where, depending on the type of query you're doing, we might just be showing you what we think you're looking for specifically. And it's not a sign that we're kind of like ignoring your rel canonical or that we haven't gotten to it, but it might be that we're just trying to show you what you're looking for. But if you have specific examples, I'm happy to take a look at that with the team.
Right. I was asking because the view all page doesn't show up at all in the site. So
that sounds strange, yeah.
Okay.
All right, Mark, I think you had a question too.
Yes, I do. Thank you, John. So my question revolves around sponsored stories. I'm curious as if a group publishes a story in, say, USA Today with links going back to their homepage, and the story is identified as a sponsored story, but they haven't no-followed those links. Is that something that's going to float PageRank from, say, a USA Today or a Huffington Post? And is this a safe practice for content marketing?
Essentially, if these are sponsored posts and you're putting links in there, then that's something we'd like you to no-follow. That's something we treat those links as being essentially paid links, because that's the reason why this content is published there. So we'd want you to kind of have a no-follow there. And that's something where the web spam team, when they run across that, they will see if they need to take action on that, and they will try to take action on that to kind of make sure that those kind of links aren't artificially impacting the link graph, essentially, that we keep.
And would that action be taken against the host site, the publisher itself, or the destination URL?
It depends on the situations. So there's some situations where we can see that one site essentially just exists in order to sell links. So the web spam team might say, well, it's easiest to take action on this one website that's essentially just selling links. Other situations we see the people buying the links are essentially only being supported by various paid links that they have somewhere else, and where it makes sense to say, okay, we'll take action on these people who are actually buying those links. links. So it's not that there's like one-size-fits-all situation here. It's really something that the web spam team has to take a look at and think about what's the proper approach here. How do we also reach the right people and let them know that this practice isn't okay? Because it's not just the case that we want to kind of clean this up on our search results, but we also want to let the webmasters of these sites know that, hey, this is a problem. You might not have been aware of this. We're taking manual action like this. Based on what we've seen here, you can clean this up, and then we can kind of like forget about this. So from that point of view, we try to find the right approach there to be as granular as possible so that we don't affect like the whole website if there's just like one sponsored post there, but at the same time that we do take enough steps to make sure that this doesn't cause any problems.
Okay, so if we were seeking visibility using one of these publishers, it may behoove the company or the client to request a no-follow tag be added, even though their language around it says this is a sponsored story or a published, promoted post, if you will.
Yeah, I definitely do that. And
okay, thank you.
I mean, depending on the type of visibility that you're gaining like this kind of sponsored content can still be very positive for the website in that people are finding information about your business, they're able to kind of click through those links, and then if they see that this is really good content, maybe they'll recommend it separately. But essentially that link there that's only there because of the sponsored content, that should be no followed.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, and with that, we're a little bit over time already. I'd like to thank you all for all of your time, your questions, and comments. It's been really interesting, as always. And I think, for this week, set up the next one on Friday, so maybe we'll see some of you guys there, depending on your time zones. Maybe we'll see you in one of the other afternoon hangouts as well. I'm also looking into setting up another Google News hangout because there are so many questions around that, and maybe we can work with some of the other teams to get some of those hangouts out for the webmaster audience as well.
Do you have 3 seconds to hang around there, John, for a private question?
Sure. All right. So with that, I'll say goodbye and hopefully see you guys next time again. Bye, everyone.